I believe we are ready. So, Tokia yanaleo, miyan kekansan, miwele pana e sona pitoki pona. Hey everyone, I'm Greg Dan3, and I want to teach you about Toki Pona. Today we are going to be talking about prepositions. And, oh boy, they are fun, because there are a whole 5 of them. That's more than I can count. So, we should probably get started. So, with prepositions, the idea is pretty straightforward. They tell you some context about what's going on. And if you've looked over Toki Pona's list of words before, you might recognize that description because it also belongs to the word la. That's going to come up a lot throughout this lesson. But the first thing you need to know is, what are the prepositions? So, they are tawa, T-A-W-A. Tawa as a preposition has to do with things moving from one location to another, or things being in a more abstract sort of direction, like, say, something's opinion. Or rather, your opinion of something. You might think of it as being similar to the English words to or for, both in the sense of to you and in the sense of to a location. Next, there is lon, L-O-N. So, where tawa has to do with traveling to locations, lon has to do with being at locations. And once again, they can be both literal and not so literal. We can be in a home with lon, or we could be just talking about something being in your understanding. And we'll get to those examples during the lesson. Then there is tan, T-A-N. Tan has to do with the cause or origin of something. So you can think of it being similar to the word because of, or the phrase because of in English. It's also occasionally used to refer to movement in the way of coming from someplace. So that's something to be aware of as well. Then there is sama, S-A-M-A. Sama has to do with sameness, and it doesn't necessarily mean being identical. It could be a little bit similar, and it could be perfectly identical. It's anything in that range, right? As with all of Toki Pona's words, it means a broad range of things, and it's up to context to determine which one exactly is meant. Lastly, there is kepiken. K-E-P-E-K-E-N. And kepiken is kind of a weird one compared to all the rest of these, because its use is much smaller than all the rest, so to speak. It has to do with using something. Generally speaking, if something has a purpose, you use it for that purpose, you would use the word kepiken to describe that process. And these are all of Toki Pona's prepositions. Now, if you compare this to the rest of Toki Pona's grammar, where there's generally a single word describing one specific purpose, this seems a little complicated. But we're going to come at this in a way that makes it as simple as possible. And in fairness, this is a lot fewer prepositions than every natural language, probably. Don't quote me on that. That's probably not true. There's probably... Anyway. More to the point, this is a pretty small set of things. To review quickly, tawa is to or for. It has to do with movement, both literal and non-literal. So, going to a location and things being in your opinion. There's a lot of nuance in there, so we'll get to it later. Lon, locations. It can be locations that are physical, like being in a home, being in a field. It can be locations in time. That's also valid. And it can be locations that are more abstract, like things being true in your feelings or to your knowledge. or things being in your feelings or in your knowledge, excuse me. Tan has to do with causes and origins. You can think of it as being similar to because. Sama is similarity in all its form. And kepekin is usage, to use something. So now that we know all the prepositions, we need to know where they go in a sentence. So we're going to clear that real quick. Now, a pretty straightforward way of thinking about Toki Pona's grammar is that basically the words we know, li and e, go in a pretty clear order. So let's say we have Yan ilo as our subject, and that's like box 1. Li starts our next box, the verb, and we'll say that has Pana. E starts our next box, so we have our object now. So let's say we have kasi sui. Again, I'll mark that. Prepositions, conveniently, just keep following this pattern. It's just that instead of there being one word in this position, always, or mostly always, there's now 5 possibilities. And in this case, tawa is going to be the preposition we'll use. Sina. Again, that's in a box, as it were. The convenience here is that this tells you unambiguously what order these grammatical particles go in. That's important because when you're new to Toki Pona, the prepositions can feel like they go kind of everywhere and they pop up wherever they want. And that's not really true. It's not technically true for everyone, but it's very, very common that prepositions go at the end of the sentence like so. You can have more than one of them, and you can have them serving multiple purposes. But in general, they will come after li and after e if they are present. And so what does this sentence mean? Well, yan ilo, tool person, that could be anything from like somebody who has a tool to somebody who is a tool. So let's say it's a robot. Yan ilo, li pana, that's to give. So a robot gives kasi sui, sweet plant, a flower. Tawa sina. So tawa is direction. Here, it's giving us some context for pana. It's not just give in any particular direction. It's give to tawa sina, you. Something is being given to you. And that's something, kasi sui. So all together, yan ilo, li pana, e kasi sui, tawa sina, that's a robot gives a flower to you. If I could draw, I would put up an iron golem from Minecraft. But I can't draw. More to the point, this tawa here is conveying direction for the verb. That's a bit of an abstract idea if you think about it tawa can be a bit abstract if you think about it for all of its possible meanings, but here it's pretty clear that it's just talking about where pana is going. Again, that context is very, very valuable. And that's exactly what prepositions do. We can actually add on to this with more prepositions, as I noted. So we could have another sentence like Pona, li, yo, e, kasi. So Pona, referring back to yan ilo. Box 1, yo, to have. And kasi, our object, plant. Ona the yo e kasi, so let's add our preposition. Lon, luka. So remember, lon is location, And this one's quite literal. So, ona li yo e kasi, that would be it, the robot, has a plant. Lon is a location, so lon Luca, Luca is hand. Altogether, it has a plant in its hand. Or, thinking about the context of the prior sentence, the robot has a flower in its hand. And again, it's entirely possible for lon and tawa and all the other prepositions to appear basically anywhere, but you can reliably tell them apart from modifiers because of two things. The first is that prepositions, again, appear primarily at the end of the sentence. And the second is that generally, if tawa or lon or something to that effect is a modifier, everything that follows it will feel like nonsense. Like, if you're thinking of something that should be a preposition as a modifier instead, you'll have this big, messy noun phrase that just doesn't follow. Or alternatively, if it's supposed to be a modifier, it might end prematurely. This is something you'll get a sense for as you keep learning. But the reason I've started with tawa and lon is because those are, by far, the most common prepositions, and probably the most easily confused as well, because they appear in so many other places in a sentence. So now that we have kind of a basis for where prepositions belong in a sentence, and roughly what tawa and lon do, we're going to continue with the other three, and then we're going to work on examples for basically the entire rest of the lesson. So let me clear that and move ahead in my notes. Here we go. Okay. So next we're going to work on tan. And don't worry, we'll go back to tawa and lon for some of their other more complex meanings if time allows. But tan, let's say we have kasi, li, wawa, tan, telo, Pona. There we go. That mostly looks right. Kasi, li, wawa, tan, telo, pona. So the prior examples had e in them. There's no requirement for e to be present. Prepositions still appear at the end of the sentence. It's just a matter of what you actually want to convey in the sentence. Here, we don't have an object. We're just describing kasi. So the base of the sentence, kasi li wawa, is literally the plant is strong, or this plant is powerful, right? Tan is telling us a cause in this case. And inside of tan is telo pona, or good liquid. And so we can think of this sentence as meaning roughly, the plant is strong because of good water. And that's a pretty straightforward idea. Again, tan has to do with causes. And so here, we are describing the reason the kasi is wawa, why the plant is strong. All right, let me move ahead in my notes again. Here we go. Clear that. All right. Now we have ona, li, tawa. Now here, tawa is a verb. Let's not worry about it being a preposition. Sama, akasi, linya. Oh, that's the worst linya ever. There we go. That's better. Sure. Ona li tawa sama akasi linya. There's that box, because sama, again, it's a bit like the other grammatical particles. It tells us sort of what things belong in what place. And sama has to do with similarity. So, first, the core of the sentence. Ona li tawa. They are moving. Or it is moving. Sama has to do with similarity, so in the same way as, or like, or similarly to. Any sort of translation is valid here, so long as it conveys similarity. Akasi linya. Akasi is reptile or amphibian. Linya is rope, string, line. And so akasi linya, that's pretty clearly a snake. And then back here, ona li tawa, they are moving. Sama akasi linya, in the same way as a snake. Now, before we continue with the next preposition, we're actually going to take a moment here to contrast this sentence with a similar one, which would be ona li sama akasi linya. Ona li sama akasi linya. Now, this one can seem a little bit weird because it looks like we've gone straight from li to a preposition. But in this case, prepositions are a little different from the rest of the grammar, so I lied to you a bit. This is the case where they can follow li directly, and now they're a bit like describing something with an adjective. But in this case, the adjective, in quotes, is an entire preposition. And since we looked at this sentence before, ona li tawa sama akasi linya, we probably can get a pretty good idea of what this one means. We know that sama akasi linya is like a snake or similar to a snake, and ona is just they or it. So this is actually just they are like a snake. There's no verb here in the middle clarifying exactly how they are like a snake. So you could argue there's a little bit less information. There pretty much is. But it's still conveying something useful, which is they are similar to a snake. Ona li sama akasi linya. As a generalization, this is another place prepositions can go, right after li. And again, it's very, very similar to an adjective. It's just a direct description, not necessarily even an action that the subject is taking. So we could contrast this with tan really quick. Ona li tan ma weka. Ona li tan ma weka. So, grammar again. Tan is kind of containing ma weka. Ma weka is one thing right here. Ma weka. Ma is a place. It can refer to really any size of place. It could be anything from a continent down to part of a room or even a spot on a shelf. But in general, it's a place. It could also refer to dirt or earth. And then weka is far away or removed. So ma weka is a far away place. Tan, remember, has to do with causes or origins. So ona li tan ma weka. They are from a faraway place. And again, the purpose of this example is to contrast with sama here. Ona li sama akasi linya. They are like a snake. Ona li tan ma weka. They are from a faraway place. The idea here is that both of these are describing the subject. Now, I'll grant that's a little bit misleading in the case of tawa, because that one can deal with going someplace. But in general, you can put a preposition as the verb. All right. So now that I made my point there, clear that. And we're going to do Kepiken. Pona, li, kama, e, seli, Kepiken, kiwen. Ona, li, kama, e, seli, Kepiken, kiwen. All right, so we've already seen the pattern, as it were, for how prepositions work. So we can look at the core of the sentence, as it were. Ona, li, kama, e, seli. Figure that one out, and then figure out what the context here is telling us. Kepiken, kiwen. Let's draw our little boxes, as it were. One for the subject, the verb, the object, and then the object of the preposition. Doesn't roll off the tongue, but that's okay. Ona, li, kama, e, seli. So they are it. They, comma, arrive in this case, or invite. Comma can be a little bit weird in the verb, but it's really, maybe I should have used a different verb here, but that's all right. It's basically arrive or invite. And in a sort of an abstract way, it can refer to creating something. And you'll see why when we get to the rest of this. Ona, li, kama, e, seli. They create heat, flame, fire, warmth. So this core of the sentence is basically ona, li, kama, e, seli. They invite fire, they create fire. It may be a little more clear to use Pali here. These two are basically interchangeable in this sentence. So Pali, work on, create, kama, arrive, invite. Interchangeable in this context, but not necessarily always. Anyway, continuing. Ona, li, kama, e, seli. They create fire. Kepiken, kiwen. Kepiken is using, excuse me. And kiwen is, of course, rock, stone, hard thing. So you can imagine somebody standing over a pile of tinder, pile of sticks, and banging some rocks together to make sparks so that they can light a fire. They arrive, invite, create fire using rocks. Ona, li, kama, e, seli, kepiken, kiwen. And as far as the prepositions are concerned, that's basically it. Although there are lots of examples I could give for lon and tawa especially. And that thing with la I mentioned, you pretty much have the idea of all the prepositions already. So as a quick review, actually I'll just quickly describe just the grammar parts. Generally, prepositions appear at the end of a statement. So they'll come after li, after e, and all that. Every once in a while, they'll appear directly after li, where they're basically describing the subject. You can have more than one of them. That's no big deal. And all of them are just giving more context to the rest of the sentence. So let's take a look at that more context thing while we get more examples for lon and tawa. Let me clear that. So if you've gotten to this point, you've probably seen the word la before and what it does. Mentioned that earlier. It's very, very useful to think as la as kind of a neutral preposition. In fact, Toki Pona, the language of good, sells it a little bit like this when it describes the fact that lon can be used this way. And let me show you what I mean. So we can have the sentence, mi lape lon, tomo, mi. So me, myself, or I rather. Lape, sleep, rest, relax. Lon, we have our preposition, a location. Tomo mi. So mi lape is I sleep or rest. Lon tomo mi is in my home. So altogether, I sleep in my home. But then there's that la thing. So let me rewrite the core of the sentence here. Mi lape. But then work backwards. Tomo mi la, mi lape. So this is what Toki Pona, the language of good, talks about, and is one of the very cool things about prepositions and their relationship to la. That is, a lon phrase, a preposition with lon, is basically interchangeable with a la phrase. And as a quick aside, you could, if you wanted, put lon here to be more clear. But tomo mi la, mi lape, and mi lape, lon tomo mi, those mean essentially the same thing. Now, when I described la before as a neutral preposition, there are technically more possible meanings for this statement here, tomo mi la, mi lape, but for the most part, these two statements are interchangeable. And that's a big deal, because it gives you a much more convenient way to refer to two pieces of contextual information at the same time, without cluttering up the back half of your sentence with lots of prepositions. Don't know if we'll have the time to get to that specific detail, but I would like to harp on this a little bit more. So we could also say, pilin mi la. Excuse me, that la looks way too much like li. La. Sina wawa. Pilin mi la, sina wawa. This one's basically interchangeable with sina wawa tawa pilin mi, or sometimes just mi. Pilin mi la, sina wawa is basically the same idea as sina wawa tawa pilin mi, or just sina wawa tawa mi. And this starts to get into another idea, which is that, in general, there are many, many ways to say very similar ideas in Toki Pona. In this case, though, what we're worried about is tawa here, and how this pilin mi, or just mi, is very, very similar to doing the same thing with la. Again, la phrases are like a neutral preposition. They do the same sort of thing of providing context to a sentence. The critical difference is that the prepositions, tawa, lon, tan, sama, kepeken, they mean specific things, where la is as neutral as it gets, not telling you something specific about the prepositional phrase, about the context. So we could similarly say, sona mi la ni li lon. Sona mi la ni li lon. Sona mi, my knowledge. La, we have our context marker. Ni li lon. Actually, this is a bit of an awkward example. So I'm going to switch out lon for nasin. Sonami la nili nasin. Sonami, my knowledge. Ni, this or that. Li nasin, it's kind of like saying is the way or is the method. That's how you do something. This is basically interchangeable with ni, li. Woo, that's a terrible nasin. There we go. Nasin, lon, sona mi. Ni li nasin, lon, sona mi. Or, this is the method, the way, in, or like in, basically in, it's in an abstract way, but the knowledge is a location. Sona mi. This one doesn't translate so well into English, but it is nonetheless appropriate in Toki Pona. I might translate this as like, this is how you do it to my knowledge. Of course, the trap here is that in English I use the word to make it sound more natural, but then as a newbie you might think of the word tawa. Well, as it turns out, tawa could also work here. Now we're kind of getting into the weeds, but the basic idea here is there are many different ways to state the same thing in Toki Pona. Prepositions are guilty of 90% of that, honestly. But the critical thing is being aware of the ways in which you can convey information with the prepositions, right? So what I'm going to do is clear this, and we're going to go back over all the prepositions and a little bit of those law phrases one more time, and then we will call it. And to make this one as easy as possible, we're going to try to do this with basically the same sentence every time. So let's say we have Yan, Li, Lon, Tomo. Yan is a person, somebody. Li, Lon, Tomo. In, Tomo, home. Somebody is in their home. Yan, Li, tawa, Tomo. Somebody, Li, tawa goes to, Tomo, home, a room, a building, right? Yan, Li, tan, Tomo. All right, this is where it starts getting a little bit silly because I chose the same sentence every time, but Yan, Li, tan, Tomo is somebody is from a home. This could be from in the sense of where they live and from in the sense of like arriving from there. Yan, Li, tan, Tomo. They, not really they, somebody, the person comes from a home. Yan, Li, sama, Tomo. The person is similar to a home. And here's the silliest one. Yan, Li, kepekin, Tomo. A person is using a home. That one doesn't have to be the silliest. You could say that being in a hotel is a matter of using a room, right? It's a matter of perspective. And now I've kind of worked myself into a corner here because I intended to do a la example, but there isn't really a way to fit la into this. So let me very quick imagine that the word let's imagine, oh goodness, there's not really a good example that works with all of these. So I'm just going to make up a verb for sometimes, well, that'll be a preverb though. I would like to avoid preverbs right now. Let's just do the la example anyway, so I'll just do a different sentence for that case. The trouble with the la example is that it does require there to be a verb. And in this case, the preposition is the verb already, so moving it out into the la phrase, all of a sudden there's nothing else to talk about. So we have to do a different example. But we can still say tomo la yan li musi. And if you really wanted, you could imagine inserting musi into the verb for all of these and kind of think about what those mean. So let's do that really quickly. Yan li musi lon tomo. Well, that's the one that's basically identical to the la phrase, tomo la yan li musi, which means in a home, somebody's having fun. Or somebody plays a game in a home, right? But then it gets silly. Yan li musi tawa tomo. You might think of this as meaning the house has a humorous opinion of the person. That's a weird way of wording it, but the person is funny in the opinion of the home. Listen, I didn't say this was going to make sense. Anyway, yan li musi tan tomo. The person is funny because of the home, but the person is rather entertained because of the home is something that makes a bit more sense. Maybe the home looks hilarious. Maybe it's a house of comedy. Yan li musi samatomo. Now that person is dressed up like a clown, just like the clown college they're staring at. Yan li musi kepeken tomo. Imagine playing hide and seek around a house. You're using the house to hide places. Yan li musi kepeken tomo. So there you go. That's prepositions in a crash course. In short, they provide context for things, and the type of context depends on which preposition you use. You can pretty frequently swap the preposition into a la phrase, although I'll warn you, you can't always. Sama is especially guilty of not letting you do that. But beyond that, you have the basic idea. You have your starting place. So that's all I had. Thank you so much for listening in. Clear that. And so we're about to hop over to the next world, but I can take questions really quick if anybody has one. We get like 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So makes something a distinct object. That is to say, there's something else in the sentence. And prepositions do that too. The difference here is that indicates you're acting on something. Oh goodness. Well, I wish they had waited like a minute or two. It's okay. Indicates that you're acting on something. So what was it? Pona, li, tawa, sama, akasi, linya. If I were to put in here, if I put it after sama, the whole sentence would kind of break down. Well, it wouldn't necessarily. It would just have a totally different meaning. Only tawa sama akasi linya. Well, sama becomes a modifier for tawa, and that's like, it's a weird way of saying they make the snake move the same way. Again, as saying you're acting on something, whereas tawa and prepositions in general are just describing the action itself. They're not saying what you act on necessarily. They're like, where does it happen? Does that make sense? Excellent. Any more questions? Oh, mooncalf. Yes, you would. Oh, no, not in that case. In that case, like, here, I'll actually demonstrate that exact example. So the first one, Yan, Li, Tawa, Nasin. Tawa is go to. So in this case, the person goes to a pathway. Yan, Li, Tawa, Lon, Lon, Nasin is what you actually mean. So there's a verb here, what they're doing, which is moving. And then we're telling us, or we're talking about where that happens. Lon, Nasin, on the path, right? But let's go back to this first example and think about what would happen if we stuck in e. Yan, Li, Tawa, e, Nasin. The person moves, applies motion to the Nasin. In other words, after this sentence, you could say Nasin, Tawa. Excuse me. Clear that. Nasin, Li, Tawa. That is, if the person makes the Nasin move, makes the path move, then the path is moving. E indicates you're acting on it. You convey something to it. So think Tawa applies to Nasin. So Nasin Li Tawa, the Nasin is now moving. But that's definitely not what you meant. What you meant was Yan Li Tawa Lon Nasin, or maybe Yan Li Tawa Nasin, depending on where they are in relation to the path, going to it or on it actively. All right, they have hopped over to the next